So apparently Windows was to be more inferior to Apple's Macintosh. So when April 1984 has been arrived, they had to change the design of the standard window, apparently, with the pre-alpha release strictly for developers shipped in May. Why pre-alpha? Because it was unstable. It's only in October when something's working, but by that time that was the 5th development release. By the time they changed the API and called their 7th development release a beta, they already stuck it well into 1985. The beta release is incompatible from whatever the first 5 development releases were, but that also meant they had to raise the RAM requirement to a half of a meg, and require a hard drive disk to be present to store the said Windows. MS-DOS 3, in other half, has got to be done on, what was that? Wikipedia says it's April 1985. Beta Wiki says it's August 1984. Oh well, it's a heavily undocumented, even by sharp comparison to the Windows 1. It got to support more space for floppies and hard disk, and I realized it could not support 1200 KB floppies until that point. Womp womp. MS-DOS 3.10 got to be done, and they are working on the 4th generation, would be referred as multitasking MS-DOS or MTDOS, because potential consumers could have multiple things working, like Flight Simulator 2.0 and multiple simultaneously, and give priorities, and process managing. It would have an entirely different command, had they go wild, and God knows how many features MTDOS would have, had I happened not to lazy and would not write anything more on 00 to 19. So there you have it. And of course Windows have to be compatible with MS-DOS version 3, and forward compatible to whatever would be the version 4 of the latter. Windows 1 was set to be released by June 28th, but it couldn't. Instead, on July 30th, Premier Edition was compiled, and ready to be used in August as a limited series. The desktop is grayscale, but several applications are colored anything other than black and white. Did it took advantage of EGA? It does, however, include calendar, reverse and card file. For some reason, in the following month, CompuData had the power to release Windows version 1 as either versions 1XX or 1XI, and it was too early to launch. How bad it was to get yourself renamed to Tulip. Now it's time for the real deal. Windows version 1.01 was released on November 20th, 1985, although for the sake of history, I got to mention the very first version was compiled before the launch for 5 days, on November 15th. Well, there you have it, nothing's changed. It's colorful, because by then EGA was thriving, and that means Reverse C gets colorful, calculator being on red background, and calendar on the blues. Unfortunately for the artists, Microsoft Paint could not have multicolor support, you could only draw in black or white. Microsoft Paint would be defined with racism and do a poly of the colors. Windows 1.01 has a good awful desktop on almost every parameter, no drag and drop functionality on many things, only a hardcore copy that, paste that, you could rename it but only up to 8 letters, although it's just the limitation of DOS we're talking. And no, there was no overlapping Windows functionality. Is it because of that Microsoft called their GUI horror as Windows? That's pathetic. Apple would sue Microsoft for launching the Windows, claiming the violation of copyright, as it argues that the look and feel of the Macintosh operating system was protected by copyright, and Microsoft Windows violated the copyright. It debates, even if Microsoft had no such functionality like overlapping windows, Apple debates that by making the GUI operating environment, Microsoft are in the wrong for making Windows. This is bullshit, but for the sake of our community, it would be a part of the story. Thanks to international outreach, if there is any, of MS-DOS version 3, and after that, Windows 1.03 got support for multiple languages. You name it, they run on German, Spanish, French, Dutch for some reason, likely Italian, and exclusively on MS-DOS 3.10 only to run in Japanese language. The most surprising and challenging expansion for Windows was to go to the Soviet market. MS-DOS 3.10 and Windows 1.03 supports Russian language. This did have to use several fonts dedicated to supporting both English and Cyrillic alphabets, one for MS-DOS, and several for Windows. For the sake of the story, MS-DOS 3.10 and Windows 1.03 selling had operated in the same way as in Western Europe, but the problem is it cost too much for the Soviets, and there was too much to handle for little rewards. However, the sale of Microsoft software, Microsoft would build the trust of their products to the people, whom other United States companies would avoid selling, because that would be either unprofitable or sanctioned. In stark contrast, although Steve Jobs visited Moscow on July the 4th of 1985, Apple apparently didn't sell Macintosh in the Soviet Union up until 1990 or later, as evident on Macintosh System Software version 6.0.7, but that didn't matter, because Steve Jobs no longer worked with Apple, quitting on September 17, 1985. Microsoft, essentially, in 1987, have been everywhere in developed countries, and seemingly on every IBM-compatible PCs. Microsoft overcame the problems of Iron Curtain, and, if Microsoft succeed, Windows would be a top operating environment, MS-DOS would be a top operating system in Russia, Intel would be a top processor, and American computer manufacturers would dominate the Soviet market. Microsoft's entry into the Soviet market would have to bring one more reason to hate Microsoft. There would be more haters of this corporation. Microsoft versus Apple would be the battle not only in the sense of the computer for everyone against the premium computers, but as a battle of communism against capitalism, as Apple would say. The Macintosh would be for the ones who earned it, and the Microsoft Intel PCs would be targeted by Apple as for the ones who did not. That's right, baby. The PC industry would be politicized, and the Red Scare would have its way to the PC market. But that would also mean Microsoft's politically incorrect approach would boost the legal battle, as Apple would argue that a Macintosh system software clone would breach the sanction, whatever that means. I'm not going to further describe why Microsoft would be in the wrong. But what I'm going to tell that it would make the second generation of Microsoft Windows difficult to develop and produce. But due to the increasingly warm United States relationship with the Soviet Union, the Microsoft's history with Russia wouldn't matter much to the case. That is, because of the Union being weakened during the Gorbachev's administration. No, it would end communism as I know it. Google keeps adding and deleting the, like, come on. In the meantime, let's dive into Windows 2.0 development. The first pancake is always lumpy. Microsoft have to improve the quality of Windows version 2. Apparently they tried to call it 1.1 during 1985 but it all went too big, and for some reason they called it version 1.5 by 1986, but decided against calling it as such after that. You didn't get to call incremental releases something .5, but apparently that was under consideration. It would have to be released on the 87H1, but Microsoft to postpone it. It wouldn't be called Windows V 1.5, but Windows V2, so there you have it. Windows 2.0 would have to go through May 1987 alpha releases, developers beta 1 releases, and beta 2 release of September 6. Windows version 2.00 would be released only as for compact portable 386 on October 1987. As for retail, Intel 286 compatible release, version 2.03, would not be ready until January 12, 1988. The retail Windows/386 would not see the light until late 1988. Microsoft had then to get Windows 2.03 to support Russian language, as it was essentially supported language of prior Windows versions, and generally I don't know why it should be mentioned at this point. Besides the Russian, it would support Swedish and Japanese languages. Apple would add additional claims, targeting Windows 2.0, thanks to its predictably ability to overlap Windows, and whatever more to follow. Would you love that? By the way, Xerox just sued Apple, because Mac OS ain't first to have the GUI of its kind. I think I had mentioned Xerox Star. Oh well, it comes in all circle, isn't that? The Windows version 2 would add the support of VGA displays. By the way, nice GPU you fools, a quarter of megabytes VRAM? And PS/2 mice. That's it. I already mentioned overlapping Windows functionality and common user access. That's because I don't want to repeat on the scenario my voters had avoided. Microsoft would have a very challenging 1988. There is no Office for Windows yet, as Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel would be absolved in development hell that would be otherwise won't take time to port on Windows. There would be a few applications that would work on Windows too, for example, Adobe Illustrator, Soft Publisher's Type Foundry, Micrographics Picture Publisher, Aldus PageMaker supported since 1987, 1990 PC Magazine Benchmark Utility, HookTech Desktop, Xerox Presence and CorelDRAW. That means, more applications has been created and launched just after Windows version 2 release, in the range of 1988, 1989, and this temp would accelerate well into the 90s. As of the Windows version 2.1, it's believed it would be an intermediate release. Windows 2.0 was thought to be version 1.1 or 1.5, as an intermediate release. But would Microsoft just have Windows 2.1, instead of jumping to Windows 2.5 or Windows 3.0? How should Microsoft address the lack of applications on Windows, and every game that respects themselves had not been released on Windows, as instead they would be run from MS-DOS or something plus Windows taking the resources necessary for powerful applications and gaming experience? For what would become an interesting story about Microsoft, Windows, the 4 years is quite interesting. Windows is no better than Macintosh system software, but Windows' openness to be installed on various computers, thanks to its commercialization, can play a role on making a monopoly of PC softwares.